The first thing I lost was the feeling in my fingertips. Not my legs, not my vision. My fingertips, the left hand first, then spreading up my wrist like cold water being poured slowly under my skin. I remember staring at my hand and thinking, that's strange. The way you think something's strange before your brain catches up to the fact that it's actually terrifying. That was the moment everything changed. And the worst part, the part that took me years to say out loud, is that it didn't have to happen. What put me in that hospital bed wasn't a freak accident. It wasn't bad luck. It was my brother. And the people who should have called for help instead stood in that kitchen and argued about whether the pot roast was going to burn. I need you to understand something before I tell you any of this. My family was not the kind of family that hits. They were the kind of family that smiles at church and keeps secrets at dinner. My mother could turn any conversation into a referendum on how ungrateful I was. My brother. I'll call him my brother because that's what he is. Biologically, even if the word feels wrong in my mouth. He was 4 years younger than me and had been my parents' project since the day he was born. He could do no wrong. That was not a figure of speech. Literally, no wrong. The time he broke my bedroom window with a baseball bat because I wouldn't let him borrow money, my mother made me apologize for provoking him. I was 28 when it happened. I'd been living in Columbus for 3 years. I had a job I liked, a 1-bedroom apartment with a second-hand couch that was more comfortable than anything in my parents' house, and a therapist I saw every other Tuesday who had spent the better part of 18 months helping me understand that leaving was not abandonment, it was survival. I had built something small and quiet and entirely my own, and I was proud of it in the way you're proud of things you had to fight for. My mother called me in October. My grandmother, her mother, was turning 80 and there was going to be a dinner at the house. Not a party, a dinner. Just family. She said that word like it was an argument I was supposed to concede to, and I felt the old pull, the one my therapist had a name for, the sense that my needs were an inconvenience I owed everyone an apology for having. I said I'd think about it. My therapist, when I told her, looked at me over her glasses and said, "What does your gut tell you?" My gut told me not to go. My gut had been telling me things about that house for years and had been proven right every single time. But my grandmother was 80. She had never been the one who hurt me. She made biscuits from scratch and called me baby and was the only person in that family who had ever looked at me and seemed to see something worth looking at. I decided I would go for her. 2 hours. Dinner, drive home. I could survive 2 hours. I drove up on a Saturday afternoon in early November. The leaves were already gone off most of the trees and the sky had that flat gray look it gets in Ohio before the first real cold. I pulled into the driveway and sat in my car for probably 4 minutes before I went inside. Old habit. My therapist called it preparing the self. I called it bracing for impact. My grandmother met me at the door. She hugged me the way she always had. Both arms, no performance about it. And for a second I felt okay. My mother was in the kitchen. She hugged me too, but briefly with her hands on my upper arms like she was checking for damage, and then immediately started telling me about the pot roast. My father was in the living room watching football. He raised his hand when I walked past. That was it. That was his greeting. A raised hand. My brother came downstairs about 20 minutes after I arrived. He had gotten bigger since I'd last seen him. Broader across the shoulders. He had the look of someone who had been lifting weights as a hobby and wanted you to know it. He came into the kitchen, looked at me and said, "You actually came. Not, it's good to see you. Not, hey. Just, you actually came." "I actually came," I said. He grinned. There was something in that grin that I recognized from childhood. The particular quality of it when he was getting away with something. But I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that was exactly the kind of thinking that had made family dinners so hard for so long. I was an adult. We were all adults now. People changed. Dinner was fine. My grandmother talked about her garden, which she'd had to let go this year because of her hip. My mother talked about a neighbor whose dogs kept getting into the trash. My father ate and said very little, which was normal. My brother sat across from me and was quiet in a way that felt slightly too deliberate, but I let it go. After dinner, my grandmother wanted to sit in the living room and have dessert, and someone needed to bring in the folding chairs from the garage. My brother volunteered. He asked me to help, which surprised me. I should have paid attention to that surprise. The garage was attached to the house, accessible through a side door off the kitchen. It was cold in there, and it smelled like motor oil and old cardboard. The folding chairs were stacked against the far wall. I went to grab the top one, and my brother said, casually, from behind me, "Hey, do you remember that trip we took to the lake when you were like 12? I turned around. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. "What about it?" "Nothing. I've just been thinking about it lately. Weird things you remember." I didn't know what to do with that, so I picked up a folding chair. He picked up two. We carried them inside. Nothing happened. I thought, see? You were being paranoid. We went back for the second round. He was ahead of me this time, already in the garage. When I stepped through the door, I felt my foot slide, not the sliding of a wet floor. It was slicker than that, more deliberate, a frictionless glide that gave me no warning and no time to react. My feet went out from under me completely. I went down sideways, hard, and the back of my head hit the corner of a Medi's shelving unit on the way down. I don't remember the impact. I remember the before, the slide. And then I remember being on the concrete floor, looking up at the fluorescent light on the ceiling, and the light had a strange double quality, like looking at something through water. My left hand was numb to the elbow. The numbness was spreading. My brother was standing over me. He had the same look on his face he'd had at dinner. That same, too deliberate calm. "You okay?" he said. "Something's wrong with my hand," I said. My voice sounded far away. He went inside. I lay on the garage floor and tried to move my left arm and found that I could. Barely, but the sensation was wrong. Not painful, which was almost worse. Just absent, the way a word sounds wrong when you say it too many times. I tried to sit up and a wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to stop. My mother appeared in the doorway. She looked at me on the floor and said, "What happened?" "I slipped," I said. "There's something on the floor, something slick." I hit my head. She came over and helped me into a sitting position. I told her my hand was numb. She told me I'd probably just landed on it wrong. She said I should come inside and sit down. "I think I need to go to the hospital," I said. She made a sound. A specific sound, one I had heard my entire life. Something between a sigh and a laugh. The sound that meant, "Here, we go again." "You hit your head?" she said. Like hitting your head was something that happened in the same category as stubbing your toe. My father had come to the doorway by then. He looked at me on the floor and said, "Can you walk?" "I don't know. My hand is numb." "Your hand isn't going to be numb from hitting your head." "Something is wrong," I said. "I can feel that something is wrong." My brother was in the kitchen, visible through the open door, doing something at the counter. His back was to us. He did not turn around. My mother helped me inside and onto the couch. My grandmother sat next to me with her hand on my knee and looked at my mother with an expression I hadn't seen on her face before. Careful, watchful, the look of someone deciding whether to say something. She said, "She's pale." "She's always pale," my mother said. The numbness kept spreading. By the time I'd been on the couch for 10 minutes, it had moved up to my shoulder and I was having trouble following the conversation in the room. Not because I was confused, but because there was a sound in my left ear, a low tone like a distant machine. I told my mother I needed to call 911. She told me I was being dramatic. That word, dramatic. I had heard it so many times in that house that it had almost lost meaning. But hearing it right then, with my arm going numb and a sound in my ear, and the fluorescent light in the garage still doubling in my memory, it landed differently. I looked at her and understood, with a clarity I hadn't had in years, that she was not going to help me. I picked up my phone and called 911 myself. The paramedics arrived in 7 minutes. My mother opened the door for them with this expression she wore when she wanted to seem reasonable, cooperative, concerned, slightly put upon. She told them her daughter had slipped and bumped her head. She used the word bumped. The paramedic who came to me first was a woman, probably early 30s, with very calm hands. She asked me what I was feeling. I told her. The numbness, the spreading, the sound, the nausea. She asked me where I had hit my head. I told her the corner of the metal shelf. She asked me exactly how I fell. That was when my brother said she just lost her footing. I looked at him. He was standing near the kitchen doorway. Same position. Same calm. The paramedic looked at him briefly, then back at me. Was the floor wet? There was a pause. In that pause, I felt the shape of something. There was something on the floor, I said. It was very slick. My mother said, it's a garage. Floors get dirty. My father said, she's always been clumsy. The paramedic did not respond to either of them. She kept looking at me. Do you want us to take you in? Yes, I said. Please. They stabilized my neck before they moved me, which told me something. My mother followed us to the door and said she would meet me at the hospital. She did not come, not that night. The emergency room ran a CT scan first, then admitted me for an MRI when the CT showed something they needed a better look at. I lay in that machine for 45 minutes with the noise of it around me like being inside a drum, and I remember thinking, with a strange detachment, that I was glad I had called when I did. I remember thinking about my apartment in Columbus, the second-hand couch, the particular quiet of Tuesday evenings. I remember wondering if I'd be able to drive home the next day. I did not drive home the next day. The attending physician came to my room at 11:30 that night. She sat down, which doctors only do when they have something that requires sitting down to say. She told me I had a cervical spine injury. Specifically, damage at the level of C5 and C6, caused by the impact to my head. She explained what that meant. She explained it clearly and carefully, and I listened, and when she was done I said, "Is it permanent?" She said, "We don't know yet." My mother arrived at the hospital the next morning. Not that night, the next morning. She came into my room and looked at the cervical collar and the monitoring equipment and said, "I didn't know it was this serious." I didn't say anything. She sat down in the chair by the bed. She said, "Your brother feels terrible." I looked at her. He said he doesn't know what happened. He said the floor might have had some water on it from when your father washed the car last week. I said, the floor was not wet from washing the car. It was slick in a specific way, like oil. She said, "You don't know that." I know what I felt. You hit your head. Your memory of it might not be. Don't, I said. She stopped. Here is the thing about growing up in a house where your experience is regularly denied. You develop a kind of inventory. You keep track. You remember exactly what things felt like because you know that memory is the only evidence you'll ever have. I remembered the feel of that floor. I remembered the way my foot slid with no resistance whatsoever, faster than any water slick I had ever encountered, too fast, with a quality that was deliberate rather than incidental. I had filed that memory the moment it happened, the way you file something you know someone will later try to take from you. The hospital called the police. Not because I asked them to. Because the attending physician, when she reviewed the mechanism of injury against the circumstances, had an obligation to report. A cervical spine injury from a fall in a residential garage, patient stating the floor was unusually slick, family members present who had discouraged emergency care. She filed a report. The police came the next afternoon. 2 officers. One of them spoke to me for almost an hour, taking notes, asking me to describe the floor, the fall, the timeline. The other one went to the house. At the house, they collected a sample from the garage floor. It came back as a silicone-based lubricant. The kind you'd buy at a hardware store. Applied deliberately, not spilled accidentally. The pattern of it was directional, concentrated near the door where someone entering from the kitchen would step first. My brother was questioned 3 days after the incident. I was still in the hospital. He said it was a product he used on the garage door hinges, and some of it must have dripped on the floor. He said he hadn't noticed. He said he never meant for anyone to get hurt. I heard all of this secondhand, from a victim's advocate assigned to my case, and I sat with it for a long time before I let myself feel what I actually felt, which was not surprise. Not even the specific grief of betrayal, because I had been grieving the possibility of my brother since I was probably 10 years old. What I felt was something quieter and more absolute. A finality. The closing of a door I had been standing in front of for my entire adult life. The physical recovery was the part people asked about most. It was also the part that is hardest to describe from the inside. The injury had caused what the doctors called an incomplete spinal cord injury, meaning the cord was damaged but not severed, meaning function could potentially return, meaning I was in a long corridor of uncertainty that stretched out in front of me with no visible end. I spent 11 days inpatient and was transferred to a rehabilitation facility in Columbus. I relearned how to use my left hand. I relearned how to maintain balance. I spent 8 weeks in intensive physical therapy. I did it mostly alone because my mother came to see me once and my father did not come at all. My grandmother came. She drove herself, which her doctor had told her not to do, and she sat next to my bed and held my right hand and did not try to explain or contextualize or minimize any of it. She just sat there. I cried. She didn't tell me to stop. She said, "I'm sorry no one protected you." That was all. It was enough. I retained most of the function in my left hand, though my grip strength on that side has never fully returned to what it was. I have residual nerve sensitivity in my left shoulder and neck. Certain weather changes, certain angles that I manage with physical therapy and, in bad weeks, medication. I have good days, and I have days where the weight of what happened. Not just the physical weight, but the particular weight of having been in that garage and understood, even as I was falling, that something had been done to me on purpose. That weight is harder to carry. My brother was charged with reckless endangerment and criminally negligent assault. He accepted a plea agreement. He did not go to prison. I want to be honest about that because the version of the story where he goes to prison and my parents lose everything is the version people want to hear, and I understand that want, but it isn't what happened. What happened was a plea, a fine, probation, and a no-contact order. My parents were not charged. The law is designed in ways that protect families, even when families are the danger. I filed a civil suit. That one took 2 years. It settled. I'm not allowed to discuss the specifics, but I will tell you that I no longer have to calculate whether I can afford physical therapy. The last time I spoke to my mother was in the courthouse hallway during the civil proceedings. She walked past me without stopping and I thought she was going to ignore me entirely. But she stopped about 4 feet away and said, without looking at me directly, "I hope you're happy with what you've done to this family." I have thought about that sentence many times since. The architecture of it, the way it takes everything that was done to me and reframes it as something I did to them. I grew up in a house where that architecture was the primary structure. It took me a long time to learn to see it for what it was. What I want to say, to anyone who is sitting somewhere right now and recognizing the shape of what I've described, the family that explains away your pain, the sibling who has always been allowed to take things from you, the specific exhaustion of knowing that your experience will be denied before you finish describing it, is this: your body knows the truth. You know the truth. The world is full of people who will try to talk you out of what you know, but they cannot change what happened, and they cannot take the knowing away from you. I live in Columbus still. The same city, a different apartment, a better couch. I go to therapy on Tuesdays. I have a scar in the back of my head that I can feel when I run my fingers through my hair, a small raised line that has faded now to silver. I have learned that healing is not a destination you arrive at. It is a direction you keep choosing, even on the days when choosing it costs you something. I do not know what my brother tells himself about what he did. I do not know what my parents tell themselves. I have stopped needing to know. What I know is what I know. A floor that was deliberate. A fall that was not an accident. A hand that went numb while the people in the next room argued about whether I was being dramatic. I was not being dramatic. The medical records confirm it. The lab results confirm it. And maybe more importantly, I confirm it. I was there. I know what happened to me. And I am still here to say so. I think about cause and effect a lot now, not in an abstract way, in a very concrete, lived-in way. The kind of thinking that comes from lying in a hospital bed at 11:30 at night while a doctor sits down across from you and chooses her words carefully. Every action has a consequence that is proportional not just to the action itself, but to the intention behind it. My brother did not accidentally leave lubricant near a door. He thought about it. He planned it. He stood in that garage and watched me fall and then asked, "You okay?" With the same voice he would have used asking me to pass the salt. That gap between what a person does and how easily they can say ordinary words immediately afterward. That is where the character of a person actually lives. Not in what they claim to be, in what they do when they think the consequences belong to someone else. My parents made a different kind of choice. They chose over and over across decades to protect him from the weight of what he was. Every time my mother explained away something he did to me, she was telling him, "Your actions don't have real consequences." She was removing the mechanism that might have stopped him. She did not cause what happened in that garage, but she built the conditions for it, one small exoneration at a time. That is a kind of participation. It is slower and quieter than what my brother did, but it is not nothing. I used to think that the people who hurt me were simply cruel, and that cruelty was its own explanation. What I understand now is that cruelty in families is almost never random. It grows in specific conditions. In households where one person's comfort is consistently valued over another person's safety, where the language of the house is designed to make the victim doubt what they know. I grew up in that language. I spent years not trusting my own memory because every time I tried to use it, someone told me I was wrong. The single most important thing I have done in my adult life is learn to trust what I know. Not aggressively. Not as a weapon. Just as a fact. I was there. I know what I felt. What happened to my relationship with my family is a consequence too. Not a punishment I chose, not a dramatic gesture. A consequence. When you build a life on the premise that one person's pain is less real than everyone else's convenience, eventually that person stops being in your life. That is not a tragedy. That is cause and effect, moving slowly but moving surely. My grandmother drove herself to the hospital against her doctor's orders. That is also cause and effect. You spend 80 years being the kind of person who shows up, and when it matters most, showing up is what you know how to do. She sat next to my bed and said, "I'm sorry, no one protected you," and those 6 words did more to steady me than anything else in that entire period. Interquity compounds over time, the same way its absence does. My grandmother had been building hers her whole life. My brother had been dismantling his. I am not fully healed. I'm not sure that's a finish line I'll ever cross. But I am clear. I know what happened. I know who I am. I know that the scar on the back of my head is not a symbol of what was done to me. It is evidence that I survived it, filed a report, sat in a courthouse, and am still here to tell it the way it actually was. That clarity cost me a lot. I would not trade it for anything.